I would like to start from your article that I read, which you published nearly a year ago in May 2025. And you describe how families have shifted away from the traditional structure towards greater diversity, single-parent households, unmarried couples, blended families. I'm sure that you know that Armenian society and policy still largely operate around this, how to say, idealized traditional family model. So how do you think that it will be the best way for Armenia to begin acknowledging and supporting this diversity without triggering like a political, social, and cultural conflict inside the society?
Okay. Yes, that's a very interesting question, because I think we need to understand or recognize that this traditional idealized family has always been an idealized family. The diversity of families has always existed. When we think about this ideal traditional family, the word is an ideal. It's an idea. It's maybe not really the reality of how people live their lives in the past or now. But what is the case is that as societies have changes from, in the last centuries, the way that families are composed and understood are all, of course, also changed. I think it's very important for us in considering these issues. Families have also changed in how they see the relationship within families. We are tending to more egalitarian and less hierarchical families. There's still, a hierarchy between adults and children, etc. But there is a shift, not only in how we are building the families, but also how we're living within these families. And that's really important. I'm saying that families are changing. I'm not saying that families are less important for people. That's the first thing, because we need to recognize that families are many times the first place of care, affection, well-being that people live through. So even if families change, families are still important, and we need to consider that. That is the first thing, and that is a very strong argument to push towards people that are more afraid of these changing family structures, that saying that, families are still very important, and they will always be important for people because it's the place where we grow up, where we place our affections, etc. Because we're thinking about challenging this idealized version of families, we also need to recognize that families need to be considered also maybe sometimes as places that reproduces exclusion and discrimination against family members, particular family members, and there I'm thinking of women, children, and older populations many times. So hidden within this idealized family idea, there is also, or the traditional idealized family ideal, is also a lack of recognition that families can be places of contention and can be places where power and violence exist. And we know this for the high levels of violence against women and violence against children. So for us to unpack and to think about changing family structure is also means unpacking this, what it means to have a traditional ideals family. Is it what is representing how people live right now first? And also, is this a concept that is really thinking about the well-being of family members, of all family members, and not only a few family members? I think as the UN, we operate in three principles. One principle is that the United Nations and everybody as members of the United Nations understand that families are needed of protection and support, because they're a very important social group for people. The second principle is that we need to recognize that there are diverse family forms as societies change, and these diverse family forms are as entitled to protection and support as the monolithic traditional ones. But underlying all of this for us, the most important thing is that we need to look at any family formation, looking at the principles of equality and non-discrimination. Unpacking who belongs to the family, how are relationships within this family really protecting their members, because not all families are looking for the well-being of their members. That's why we have GBV, we have intimate partner violence, we have violence against children, and we have less access to resources for many women and girls, etc., etc. So what I will say in conclusion is that families will change as societies have changed, first of all. It's going to be part of people's lives. The second thing is that the universal, traditional ideal family has never been monolithic and universal. The diversity of family has always existed. And the third principle is that when we think about families, we need to recognize that they're a very important place for people, but also that families, as any institution and in society, need to respect the equality of all its members. That's my take.
And if we talk about traditions or stereotypes, and I think it's very interesting, sometimes we mix the tradition with the stereotype. And actually, sometimes we are talking about stereotype, but we tend to present it as a tradition and vice versa. Yes. So again, if we talk about Armenia, or I think it's usual for the whole region, like there are traditional gender norms, and in Armenia we strongly associate masculinity with breadwinning and femininity with caregiving. So our men are the strong people and our women are less strong. And so from your experience in this region, what approaches have proven most effective in trying to shift these norms? Because we understand that this is not something that you can push and say, from tomorrow you're going to change. So you need to have a more sophisticated approach. And what do you think, again, based on your experience, what is working and what is not?
Yes. That's very interesting, and I want to go back to your idea of tradition. It's also because tradition is not monolithic. Tradition is reinventing all the time.
Absolutely.
When did tradition start? We don't know. At some points, we selected that these are the traditions that we will say are part of our community or imagined community. In terms of the masculinity, the first point is that masculinity is also not monolithic. So there are many different ways of expressing your gender identity as a man. Mm-hmm. Not all men react and have the same drivers. It depends a lot on their, economic status, where they live, their race, their ethnicity, etc., etc. So again, this breadwinner idea is an idealized version of what masculinities are. And the first point is that this breadwinner idea, or the very monolithic understanding of how men should behave, is not only sometimes damaging women, is many, many times also damaging their own men and their well-being and mental health. That's the first thing, to unpack what this masculinity ideal means. In terms of the breadwinner, particularly, we live in a spectrum. We don't live in one role only. So many men live through, this earn winner. They have a job, they earn money, but sometimes they earn money or they earn less money, or they take care of the children, they take care of their parents. So people behave in different ways than this masculine breadwinner idea. That's the reality of how people live. But what has worked, and that's responding directly to your question, is that, and this has to do with gender norms. Gender norms are the expected behavior based on my gender. So I think I should do this because this is the behavior that is expected from me. Is that, first of all, is to challenge these expectations. Are these really the expectations of the people that live around you? That is an expectation that is necessarily just not based on reality, because we expect a lot of people, a lot of things from men and a lot of things from women that are not necessarily in these little boxes. But what really, really works is to put a positive spin to challenging this role, is to put a positive spin into men coming out of this just very fixed role and saying the benefits of more engaged, for example, fatherhood and care. That is challenging this breadwinner, very monolithic role. Is like taking care of your kids will benefit you. What doesn't work is blame and shame. it's your fault, you're not doing it, you should adapt, blah, blah, blah. We know that absolutely doesn't work. So it's, and in Armenia, the colleagues in UNFPA, and you can ask them more about this because I think it's a very interesting initiative. They have this Fathers Club that really challenges the breadwinner idea and look and work with men and try to engage them in this case, in engaged fatherhood, spending time with their kids, how positive it is, not only for their children, but for themselves to shift these expectations and these stereotypes. And that's what works. But also, let us think about more deeply that this breadwinner idea is creating a false dichotomy. It's like you're either this or you're this. But when in reality, our lives is much more complex. You can earn money, no problem, and you can take care of your kids, and you can take care of your elderly parents, and you can take care of your friends or your community without necessarily, damaging your masculinity or the idea that you're able to access resources and have economic independence. Yeah. This is what works. What is in it for you? How can you benefit if you start questioning these traditional norms?
I think my next question is directly linked to the previous ones. It's about domestic violence.
Yeah.
We know that it's a big issue for Armenia in particular. There has been progress, like on legislative level. There are laws. There are some changes and shifts in the society, but still the problem remains. And the main issue, I think that, again, if we talk about this so-called tradition, so I should not interfere in someone else's family, even if I know that something is going very wrong there. So yeah. Again, this is about making some kind of social or cultural shift to make this absolutely unacceptable for everyone. And again, what is your idea? It will require, of course, a lot of effort, a lot of time. But what is the best way to address this?
Yes, first of all, I think that I want to say that laws are very important, but not enough. Laws are a very, very important first step that states and governments can take into creating not only the services and the tools to help survivors of violence, but also giving a message. This is very important in the policy and legal framework, giving a message that violence is not accepted. That's why laws are also important, because it links to what I'm going to say now, which is, laws are important, but not enough. Because if we think about gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, and all types of violence that we see that there's so high levels. It comes, as you said, with the gender and social norms that reproduce and tolerate this violence. Why is it acceptable for a man to beat her wife or his wife or a partner or girlfriend or even elderly mother? Why is it acceptable? And therefore, we need to look at the root causes of that acceptability of violence. And the root causes have to do with discrimination and exclusion of women, but also, and this is the most difficult and important part, it has to do with the power relations that happens amongst gender. Yeah. The more power that men have over women and the sense that they can control and can discipline women when they think they're not behaving in a way that they want. And that is really hard to challenge. That is a very, very hard not to crack. But if we don't do that, we will always be sort of superimposing solution that really doesn't address the root causes. So I think we go back to masculinity again. To be a successful strategy to eradicate violence completely, it also not only has to do with how women are protected from violence, but also how men are expressing their masculinity and they understand the relationship with the women in their life. And that these power imbalances create behaviors that are bad for women, but also bad for men. Being a violent person is not a nice thing to be. because if you're a violent person, you're probably also being violent against yourself and against other people. So finally, I think we need to think about how do we shift these gender norms, the acceptability of violence and all of that, but really looking at the root causes. What is driving this violence? And what is driving this violence is, of course, personal experiences. You know, if there's evidence that if you have seen violence in your home, you will probably be more violent when you grow up. There's a substance and alcohol abuse and all of that. But fundamentally, there is a justification and understanding that men have the right and they're justified when they use violence. And this has to do with their own power. And giving up that power, it's not necessarily a good word, because it's not giving up power, it's understanding that this power is toxic to yourself and to the relationship that you have with the women in your lives.
Yeah. I absolutely agree, because again, if we talk about laws, even if the laws are in place, for example, you can see from time to time reports in Armenian media that especially this is common in the small rural communities. Even if a victim of the domestic violence goes to the police and tells about her case, a policeman could tell her, well, I understand you, but probably we will not start the legal proceedings. Go and try a way to come to find a solution with your husband, etc., etc. And so, yeah, I agree that we should find the root causes.
Yeah,
and legislation is absolutely necessary. But if we are not changing ourselves, even the best legislation would not help.
These gender norms and the justification of violence is not only with the perpetrators, it's also creating biases in the system that should protect the women. So that's why, I totally agree with you, Anna, that's why it's so important to look at the deep causes, because this is affecting the whole society approach. It's not only the perpetrator who has these biases, it's the family of the perpetrator that may be justified, it's the community, is the state, is the police, is the judge that may dismiss the case, etc., etc. Yeah.
And I would also to come back to your article where you connect limited gender responsive family policies directly to the impossible trade-off that many women face between career and family. Again, something very common for Armenia. And do you think that we can find, if we may call it a link of the fertility decline in Armenia to this structural failure versus other factors?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there is a concrete link. However, we know that there are factors that are going in parallel. Yeah? So we know that there is evidence that due to the burden that women have to do on unpaid care work, because all the labor of raising, taking care of children relies on them, many times they have to choose between having work and having a family. Because not all women have either the family or the network to be able to support her in that. They definitely many times don't have a supportive partner that supports them in the unpaid care work. And the state is not, or the government or the state overall, the institutions are not providing the policy solution that will allow her to choose between these two things. So there is definitely evidence of that. You know, the old breadwinner model that we were talking about before, that you have the man earning the money and the woman taking care of the kids. Economically, it's not viable right now. Now we live in what we call a dual earner society. You need both parents to work to be able to have, the life expectations that they want. So if you have a dual partner work economic system, something needs to give up. Either you give up your family aspiration in terms, I wanted 2 kids or 3 kids, I can only have 1 or 0 because I need to work.
Yeah.
Or you give up your work, and that puts you in a very, very precarious economic condition. Women's access to resources like employment, money, it's not only because it helps you have the family that you want to have right now, it also protects you in the future, in your life course. First of all, you can lose your partner. If you lose your partner, you're the sole breadwinner right now. And if you don't have the career or the education, that puts you in a very, very, very precarious position, especially if you have children. And secondly, during the life course, if you think about pension system and etc., they're based on employment. So you have higher levels of old women in old age poverty because they haven't worked during their lifetime. So when they become older, they don't have a pension, they don't have a partner to support them. They may not have a family, or the families are taking care of their own, needs. So you have higher old age poverty amongst women. I mean, the core of the issue is linked to the breadwinner model that you mentioned is, the women's unpaid care burden. The fact that they need to take care of their families and they need to earn money at the same time. That many times needs to give. That is a dichotomy that cannot happen, and some women decide not to have any children. But having said that, I don't want to say that this is the only cause for low fertility rates. There are other, people live complex lives, as I said before. Their aspirations might be different. There is an anxiety about the climate change. There is an anxiety about the future of the world itself, the peace and security that we knew before is not there anymore. Underlying all of that is also a rethink of what it means to be men and women. In more traditional societies, what it meant to be a woman was to be a mother. That's two things that were completely linked. You were not a woman if you were not a mother. And now I think kids, especially younger generations, are starting to think about that a little bit more and having a more broad expectation in their life, which I think is fine. I mean, I think it's okay for people to try to be as happy as they want. The problem is when they want to have a family and they cannot because the institutions are not protecting them, because there is not an enabling environment to help them have their family or fertility aspirations.
Yeah. And probably my last question would be again about so-called traditions.
Yeah.
And I'm sure during your career you faced this issue many times when, for example, you are advising some countries, some institution, or some certain people, and they are saying you don't understand like our society, our culture, our traditions. You are coming and teaching us, and you don't know how it works. And so all the issues that we have discussed today, gender issues, domestic violence, etc., in Armenia, they are also very often becoming a political issue, especially before the elections. And some political forces are saying that like some foreign actors are trying to interfere and to in our lives, in our societies, in our families. I believe that there are some values and some principles that they are universal for everyone. Of course, you should take into account some traditions, I mean real traditions, or the culture of the given society, but still I think that there are values that are like for everyone. So what will be your response, or if someone is telling you, please don't teach me, I know it very well, and you don't know how it works in my country, what is your response?
And this is a very personal response because this is almost anecdotal. The first thing that I clarify when I get this question is I'm not European, I'm from Chile, I'm from Latin America. So personally, I'm not behind any Western agenda, blah, blah, no. I'm from that part of the world. I face, the same, not the same, but similar conundrums in a way. Yeah, so that's my first personal thing. I'm not European, so my standpoint doesn't come from that feeling of imposing values that are not yours, because these are not only I come from a place, and this is when you talk to people about these things, it's very important for me to not to be super general, but to be clear of where you come from as a person.
Yeah.
Because we relate as people. I mean, I don't relate to you or to any policymaker that are thinking about these things only as, you know, from the UN telling you what to do. These are the policies that you need to do. No, I am me, and I believe these things for a reason. So that's the first thing, just to say, you know what? I am not from the rich Western capitalist, you know, world. I am from Latin America, from a country that is very, very far away from here, but it's also facing very important development challenges. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, for me, the most important thing, the basic principle, as you say, Ara, is the principle of equality and non-discrimination. Is the principle of thinking about the well-being of all your population, not just sectors of your population, or not just groups of your population, yeah? So when your tradition or your idea of tradition is reproducing exclusion and discrimination against particular group of people, being it based on gender, race, ethnicity, class, or whatever, that is problematic for me as a basic principle. So traditions are okay. You know, traditions are wonderful. I am an anthropologist. I love traditions. Traditions are okay and wonderful as long as they protect the well-being of the people that where these traditions are being practiced. And that is the whole basis of about thinking about gender equality. It's not against tradition. Absolutely not. It's just thinking about how are these traditions affecting women and girls? Are we reproducing systems of exclusion and discrimination that we could avoid with, you know, this appeal on tradition? That is the most important thing. In many countries, you have this tradition of welcoming your neighbor. Yeah, you're very open. You invite them to eat, blah, blah. Perfect. I have nothing against that. But if a tradition, for example, in Armenia, you have gender-biased sex selection. So you have higher population, you know, you have selective birth of men, girls and boys. That is a tradition, and maybe, I mean, it's not maybe, it's really damaging, not only to the girls that are not born, but also to the overall society, because you get an imbalance in how many women and men you have. So it's about unpacking what traditions mean, not from a perspective that traditions are bad, like external, like an imposition from these, you know, external foreign ideas. Is looking internally at what are the traditions that are not necessarily benefiting all your population, that are putting women at risk of not being born, for example, or at risk of having less access to resources at some point in their lives and having, you know, all-time poverty. Like, why do you want to have old, poor women in Armenia? It doesn't make any sense. So do something about this. But also traditions change, as we say at the beginning. They're not monolithic at all. At some point you decide this is a tradition that we will have for our country. And some traditions disappear and nobody missed them. So the main principle that I think we need to think about when we have this discussion with policymakers and with anyone in our lives is, are you reproducing, how are you affecting the lives of all the people that you should be working for? Are you reproducing exclusion and discrimination? Are you reproducing poverty? Are you reproducing violence, et cetera, et cetera? And if that is the case, that is not necessarily a good perspective to have on how society should work.
Thank you very much, Gabriela.